Hi, Alvin de Leon here, natural health practitioner, international speaker, and father of two. Now, we recently just attended and presented at one of the biggest health shows here in Toronto. And one of the more common questions and really source of frustration that I learned from a lot of the people that stopped by to speak to me after our presentation and at our booth was this idea that people still felt frustrated that they were doing all the right things, right? They were cleaning up their diet, they were changing and eliminating certain foods from their dietary intake, and yet, despite that, they still had their symptoms. We often heard people saying how they felt great, since they were doing the cleanse and they were eliminating certain foods, but their rash or their digestive symptoms were still hanging around. It was still there. It didn't really make much of a difference. And so as I start to really explain to people this new health perspective, this idea around German new medicine or GNM, that there's really an emotional component to whatever symptoms that we experience, people start to really get a new understanding. They start to look at their physical ailments from a new perspective. And so what I hope to share with you today in this video is really just 3 of the strategies that I've developed in the last few years in helping my own patients and my own clients to overcome their physical or chronic symptoms, just by implementing what I call the ABCs of conflict resolution, or the ABCs of really symptom relief. And so the A in the ABCs stands for awareness. And it's really an awareness that there's an emotional component to our physical symptoms, that regardless of whether you have a rash, digestive problem, you've got shoulder pain, that there was something that was going on in your life around the time that symptom first showed up, or just prior to, that was an unexpected stress for you. It's sort of something that went on, whether it's an event, a circumstance, a comment, a criticism, something going on in a relationship that you didn't quite expect, and that it was potentially emotionally distressing for you at that time. And so once we start to become aware that whatever physical symptoms we are experiencing actually was potentially tied to this unexpected emotional conflict, that awareness alone almost seems to initiate a change in the symptoms. Perhaps it reduces the intensity of your symptoms, or maybe it even shortens the duration of the symptoms to the point that oftentimes within a week of helping my patients identify the conflict, they're able to start to see relief, 50%, 75% improvement in their symptoms. Now, the key component here to remember is that the awareness stands for what it was going on in your life at the time that the symptoms first showed up, and not necessarily where you are today. Because I know that for a lot of people that we see that are suffering from, for example, digestive issues, they may have had those symptoms, back when they were a teenager or when they were a young child, and let's say now they're in their 40s or 50s. So you need to really look at this and think of what was going on in my life when I was 7 or 8 years old, or 13 or 19 years old, that I could have experienced as an unexpected shock or something that was upsetting at that time. Okay, so again, just that awareness sometimes is enough to really create a change in the way your symptoms are presenting. Now, the second part of the ABCs, B, stands for breaking the association to your tracks or triggers. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we have these unexpected shocks or unexpected events in our lives, our body becomes heightened in terms of our ability to perceive everything through our senses. So, an example I give to my patients is if a small dog was walking down an alleyway and gets attacked by a bigger dog, well, that small dog now, if it survives that attack, its senses will be heightened to everything around its environment, the sight, the smells, the taste in its mouth, the sounds, so that the body will say to that little dog, well, the next time you smell this, or you have this taste in your mouth, or you hear this sound, you've got to be on alert because you may be attacked again. So our bodies biologically do the same thing to protect us from those unexpected events that are emotionally distressing for us. And so these often are what lead to what we know as tracks or triggers. And so one of the things that we have to do once we identify what our original conflict is, we now need to break the association to what triggers our symptoms today. You know, particularly those of you that are suffering from chronic ailments, perhaps, you know, some of the symptoms that you have began when you were a child because you moved to a new school and that was upsetting for you. And that led to some digestive problems. You know, now that's, and let's say now it's diagnosed as a Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome. Well, you need to be aware that your digestive issues began at 8 years old when you were unhappy with the move and that was a shock for you at that time. And that you have to break the association that it's the food that you're eating, because it definitely can be related to whatever taste you had in your mouth at the time that that original shock took place. You know, again, we see this a lot with our patients where their digestive issues began after they find out their parents are divorcing, for example, or it began after going out to dinner with their girlfriend or boyfriend, and then they break up with them at dinner. And so whatever taste is in your mouth, whatever is around you in your environment at that time can be a potential trigger or a track that's a reminder for your body to remind you to get away from that scenario in order to protect you, because the last time, you know, you're eating pasta, or the last time you smelled that smell of smoke, your parents got divorced or you got dumped by your girlfriend or your boyfriend. And so your symptoms will show up next time those senses are picked up by your body in order to protect you. And this is really how allergies tend to develop. And one of the key points in helping people overcome their physical and chronic symptoms is to be aware, again, not just of the emotional component, but to break the association that it's not the food, you know, that it's not the environment, that it's not the weather, that it's not the season, you know, that potentially the reason your sinus issues flare up in the springtime is because in the springtime is when your grandparents passed away suddenly, or in the springtime is when you had to move to another school or another location, and that was the original conflict. Okay, so remember, A, become aware of the emotional component. B, break the association to the triggers and the tracks, and always relate it back to the original emotional conflict that started the symptoms in the first place. Now, the C of the ABCs stands for changing your perspective. You know, are you able to change your perspective regarding the situation or what the conflict was? For a lot of people that are suffering from chronic ailments, a lot of the times it's not so difficult to change the perspective, particularly if you realize that the original conflict began when you were 8 years old or 12 years old. You know, if that was 30 or 40 years ago, sometimes it's a little bit easier to just change the way you look at it and realize I'm not a 12-year-old kid anymore. I'm not an 8-year-old kid anymore. You know, it must have been really stressful for me at that time to move, but as an adult, that's not a big deal. And so you see how it's a little bit easier to change our perspective sometimes over things that happened a long time ago versus something that's more recent or more current, because maybe that there's still an emotional charge around that conflict. So for a lot of people where, you know, for example, their issue has to do with their ex-spouse and they still have to deal with them because of the kids and they have shared custodies and whatnot, well, how can you really change your perspective over the relationship? How can you emotionally become more flexible and emotionally become more mature in order for you to look at your situation and recognize that, you know, how long do I want to keep looking at this situation this way, particularly if it's causing you some physical symptoms? And so one of the ways that you can look at that is just to put the overall picture in perspective and to detach yourself from your situation and to really look at the big picture and to look at the fact that you have a choice, that your ability to decide that you're going to change, that you're going to grow, and that you're going to evolve from that situation that was emotionally charged or was a source of potential conflict from you, that you're going to be able to decide to move forward from that so that your body can also heal and your symptoms can be resolved. So really, over the years, I know it sounds simple that it can just come down to the ABCs, but I've really been very fortunate to have seen many patients and clients get results simply from implementing the ABCs of conflict resolution. And so here, I just want to share with you a case study here of really a friend of mine who I saw a few years ago at the funeral of his mother who passed away. And, you know, this is somebody that I hadn't seen in a couple of years. And I just want to use this case to just reiterate and highlight the application of the ABCs and how quickly it can respond for somebody. So as I saw my friend, I went to shake his hand, and I could see the cracking and the redness and the swelling in his hands. And I, started asking, what's been going on? And he mentioned how it's been a rough 6 months for him. And his, he didn't know what was going on. He was in and out of hospitals for the last 3 months. And they finally were able to diagnose him with psoriatic arthritis. He said that he was limping because his ankles were swollen. His wrist was so painful and weak. And his hands really looked bad. His skin throughout his whole body looked pretty bad. And so at that time, I just, I didn't have much time. I just made him aware that maybe there's an emotional component. What was going on 6 months ago prior to the skin changes and the pain showing up. And he did mention that he was going through a difficult time at work. And so I asked him to give me a call, after the issues with the funeral were done, and maybe we could discuss it further. Well, he called me immediately the next evening, because he mentioned that morning he woke up and his skin was the best he had seen it in really a couple of months. And his wife even commented, what did you put on your hands? How come it's better today? And all he could mention was, actually, I just talked to Alvin yesterday, and he mentioned something about how it could be, there's an emotional component to it. And so that really prompted him to want to learn more. And so as we began to work with him, and as we began to look at what else was going on in his life, we start to realize how, his symptoms were really challenging to a certain degree, but as he continued to identify what his conflicts were, what his tracks were, how he tried to break the association, he started to work on changing his perspective around work. He started to get results. And within a couple of months, he started to get changes. But the amazing thing is that, he implemented a lot of strategies in order to change his perspective at work. And I was really amazed at his diligence in doing that. And within 5 months, he was able to get to the point where his skin was completely cleared up. He was back physically to the same shape that he was at. He had no more joint pain. And this was, the amazing thing is he got off all his medications. He was not taking any medications at this point. He was not changing his diet or doing any other therapies at this point. A lot of it was just the ABCs that we talked about. But he implemented a lot of the strategies in order to really shift his perspective around his work situation. And so, again, this is an amazing case. And again, this is not to say that everybody's case is this simple, because even this case alone was very complex and very complicated to a certain degree. But again, with the persistence, with the patience, and with the ability to really just work on yourself and to be able to change the way you look at the world, to change the way you look at yourself and look at your body, there's amazing things that we can do, and we have an amazing ability to heal. So I hope that this video serves you and allows you to potentially start to look at your own life right now. Maybe assess and go introspectively as to why you're suffering from the symptoms you're suffering with. Become aware of what was going on in your life at that time just prior to those symptoms showing up. Break the association that it's not some of the things that you were told over years, that maybe it's not the food, it's not genetics, it's not your environment, that it's safe to eat those things, it's safe to be in that environment. And then can you change your perspective over what it was that was really going on, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a work environment, whether it's a move or some sort of change in your life at that time. And so I hope that you're able to implement these ABCs, and I hope you're able to get the results that can help you to not only get back to doing the things that you love, but to really go out and be empowered that you can implement these same strategies for any other symptoms that you may experience for the rest of your life. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.